Hello and welcome to our final Teacher PD, co-presented by the Human Rights Arts and Film Festival and ACME. My name's Kate Disher-Quill, I'm a screen educator and I work with both organisations. I'm pleased to introduce to you today our two guests, Kate Disher-Quill, hello, and disability advocate and consultant Tash Swingler. Tash Swingler works with Origin's platform as a lived experience advocate and consultant, and Moonee Valley Council's Young People's Committee, where they advocate for the needs of youth, particularly in regard to mental health in our community. Most recently, Tash is working as peer support and associate at YLab. Kate Disher-Quill is a Melbourne-based photographer who also works with film and multimedia. Kate runs a full-time photography business, exhibits her work and guest speaks all over Australia. Most recently, Kate published her book Earshot, an ongoing project centred around deafness. It combines photography and illustration with poignant storytelling to provide a unique and powerful insight into the experiences of deafness and hearing loss. This session is designed to complement the short film Shakespeare in Tokyo and the lesson plan that we've created for your use in the classroom. The resources are there for you to use in part or as a unit. It's up to you. This lesson plan, Disability Rights, has activities tailored to years 5 to 8 and 9 to 10. This lesson plan supports students to begin to understand that people living with disability have rights and deserve to live without discrimination. There are ways that we can remove barriers and promote a more inclusive community and school environment, and the importance of a person-centred approach to disability. So to start, what is disability? Well, the World Health Organization defines disabilities as an umbrella term covering impairments, activity limitations and participation restrictions. An impairment is a problem in body function or structure. An activity limitation is a difficulty encountered by an individual in executing a task or action, while a participation restriction is a problem experienced by an individual in involvement in life situations. So, Tash, in Australia, disability rights are protected by the Disability Discrimination Act. Can you tell us some of the areas in life that are covered by this Act?
So the Disability Discrimination Act covers practically anything that we do in day-to-day life. So things ranging from employment, access to things like buildings, hotels, inclusion in sport. It covers practically anything that has the potential for a disability to cause an issue with accessing. Unfortunately, the thing is, it's a lot of the time on employers, on sport clubs, on schools, on buildings to actually enact the policies themselves that provide that access. Whilst the Disability Discrimination Act makes not providing those typically illegal, it is a little bit murky in regards to hardship in putting those measures in place, and unfortunately sometimes they don't actually get enacted, so that access is limited for things like sports clubs, day-to-day activities, going to a shopping centre, going to a local youth hub. Those kind of things can be incredibly limited. Employers can, unfortunately, sometimes say that you're not qualified for a job that realistically you can do. And whilst the Disability Discrimination Act does have provisions that encourage employers to make reasonable considerations, that's not always the case.
Can you give us an example of what some of those considerations might be for an employer?
So for an employer, it may be simple things, providing ramps if necessary, having elevators be accessible, having spaces be accessible for whatever that person needs. It can also be things like having keyboards that are sensitive to different needs, having spaces that you can go if you will need some space to yourself. It's basic, simple things that often get overlooked.
So Tash, could you please talk a little bit about the ways that disability discrimination shows up in our community?
So I guess we see it day to day. I mean, working within my community in mental health, we see people passed over for jobs because they might need an extra 5-minute break here or now. It's little things. It's not necessarily not getting the job from the outset. It might be not getting a promotion because you've had to take a couple of days off to take care of yourself. It might be because you take medication that occasionally makes you drowsy. There are all these little things that play into taking care of ourselves that should be rewarded instead of punished. And unfortunately, that's often not the case.
So it's not always physical adjustments, it's actually understanding every person's own personal needs and being able to make adjustments to make that environment, I guess, enjoyable and equal for them.
Absolutely. I think we forget that disabilities do include things like mental health conditions, psychiatric disorders.
Mm-hmm.
They're absolutely included. They're embedded in the Disability Discrimination Act.
Yeah. So Tash, can you tell us a little bit about your advocacy work?
So predominantly my work is working with other young people who have similar lived experiences and advocating for what can be done within our communities to make our lives easier, to make it clear that we are no different than anyone else. Unfortunately, we may need some extra provisions. Shouldn't be too much to ask.
Do you find yourself educating people continually in your personal life as well as your work life?
Every single day. I think that for some of us who may have more invisible disabilities, it's an ongoing process to make sure that it's recognised that we do have different needs sometimes.
And Kate, can you tell us a little bit about the work that you make?
Yeah, so I basically use photography and storytelling as a way to educate people, to inspire compassion and understanding through the experiences of other people. So I feel like there's a lot of stories out there that we don't hear, that we don't see, and I guess what I feel most passionate about in my work is using photography as a way to open up conversations about things that the majority of people don't necessarily talk about day to day.
And why is it important that people living with disability are involved, I guess, in creative pursuits and industries?
Well, so art and filmmaking, a lot of creative pursuits allow people to express themselves. It's a way to share their stories in a variety of ways, whether it's visually or through storytelling. And I believe that we need more of these stories to really understand the world, to understand how people live day to day, and the rest of us can really learn something from those experiences. And the more we have, the more compassionate we become, the more understanding we are as a community.
So, Kate, you've just published a book called Earshot that's photography and illustration. Can you tell us a little bit about it and whether it's a good resource for teachers?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the reason I created it was really for my younger self. I was diagnosed with hearing loss when I was 3 and fitted with hearing aids when I was 10. And I grew up feeling incredibly ashamed about that part of myself. I wouldn't wear my hearing aids outside of a classroom. I was aware that society judged people who were different. And there were never images or stories around me of young people with hearing loss. You know, I walked into an audiology centre and it was images of old people, the people around. No one in my life had hearing aids except for my grandmother. So I felt quite isolated in my experience. And so I created Earshot really as a resource for children, young adults, parents. It basically is a coffee table style book that shares the experiences of people with hearing loss in various degrees and filled with beautiful imagery. And so as a photographer, obviously, I felt the best way to represent this idea was through photography and illustration, as well as having those stories there. And it really just opens up a dialogue about the various experiences that people face that they may not have expressed otherwise. So for a lot of us, we have hidden disabilities that you can't see, that we walk down the street and people respond, "Oh, I never would know." And there's so many of us that live like that and feel quietly ashamed, and so we don't talk about it. And so having resources like this allow other people to then share their own. And so you can read a story and then ask, well, what about you? How do you feel in your day-to-day life that might be different to what society considers normal? Because there's so many of us that live different lives that don't fit into this societal norm.
There's actually very few that fit the norm in a way.
Well, what is normal?
Yeah, what is the norm, exactly. That sounds like a fantastic resource. So where can teachers find the book?
Yeah, you can find it on our website, which is earshot.com.au, or in any leading bookstores. It's available in some libraries, or you can request it.
Yeah, sounds like a good one for libraries. Thanks, Kate. So now let's talk a little bit about the short narrative film Shakespeare in Tokyo. The film tells the story of Ben, a Shakespeare fan with Down syndrome who takes off to discover the sights of Tokyo. To do this, Ben escapes his overbearing older brother who thinks that Ben belongs in a home. Along the way, Ben uses Shakespeare, his sketchbook and his wits to win the hearts of the people he meets. And the story really very well draws out some of the key issues at stake within disability rights.
Yep, I know. Of course I know. I know, mate. Yes. 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 Yes, of course I'm prepared. When in the last 10 years haven't I been prepared? Sorry, and why can't Dan's secretary take him to the movies or something? Keep him occupied? Yes, I know they're a big client. I'm very aware of that, but I couldn't leave him in a hotel, could I? Because you kept talking about catching a train or a bus or something.
Anthony, I'm in Tokyo. I haven't seen anything.
Okay, shush, mate. Yeah, I'm his legal power of attorney, okay? So until a place comes up in a home or something, he's my responsibility. Everyone's just gonna have to deal with it.
Mum wanted me to live in her cottage, not in a group home.
I know, mate, but this is the real world, okay? And Mum is not here to look after you.
In 20 years, you only ever came home for 3 Christmases. So how could you possibly know anything about me?
Kate, you've seen the film Shakespeare in Tokyo. How does this film help us to question the representation of people with disability?
Often we're seeing films that are through the lens of the able-bodied community. Quite often the focus is put on the struggles of that person, and essentially disability is represented as a deficiency. Very rarely do we see a film like this that is through the lens of the experience of that person living with disability. And so in Shakespeare in Tokyo, we learn from Ben's character what he thinks, what he feels. We really get an understanding of how he lives day to day and how he navigates the world that is predominantly set up for able-bodied people. And so in doing this, it really makes us question our own perceptions of people with disability. It allows us to empathise with him. It really builds more empathy, with more compassion with the audience.
Have you seen many films that show characters with a disability in a strength-based way?
Very rarely. And I think it's one of the biggest struggles that a lot of people find, even creating a resource like this, where we want to understand the experience of those living with disability, but quite often they're not co-created with that person with disability, or they're maybe the research hasn't been done properly to really understand that experience. And yeah, it's something that's really lacking in the film industry, and which hopefully we can really work towards improving the representation of people with disability. Bus Stop Films, who made this film, actually have a really fantastic slate of films and a very much, I guess, a co-production. They work very closely with actors and writers and directors with disability. So we're big fans of their films.
Yeah, absolutely. So how closely does the attitude of Ben's brother reflect that of people in our community?
Yeah, sadly, I think it's quite common because we haven't necessarily been educated on the lived experience of that person. It leads us to compare their lives with ours, and so we see perhaps a deficiency or a hardship and we think, oh, I could never do that, or again, focusing on the negative aspects of their life. But if we really started to shift our perspective and think, okay, well, this is a difference that they have, and what are the different aspects of their lives that they, whether it's how they communicate or how they physically navigate the world, just thinking of it as a difference allows us to shift our thinking and go, okay, well, how could we create a different system to enable them to navigate the world equally so we have equal access.
So Tash, what do you think this film's saying about the rights of people living with disability?
I think it just highlights that we're still in a place in this world, unfortunately, that despite there being a large motto within the community that we're different, not less, it is perceived as being less. There's kind of the overcrowding of being hovering around us, trying to make sure that we can do things that we know we can do for ourselves. But because we're different, surely we can't do it. I think it highlights that there's a lack of independence sometimes simply because people are overprotective, not allowing us to live the lives that we're typically capable of living, that we want to go out and enjoy. I think this film's just really highlighted that that's still an issue, has been for a long time, and we haven't made those steps yet to tackle it.
Do you think it is about exposure? So for a more able-bodied people having more exposure to, as you say, the lived experience of people with disability and actually listening instead of assuming, I suppose?
Absolutely. I don't have an issue if someone comes up to me and wants to have a conversation. In fact, I'd rather you do that than look and stare and make something uncomfortable. If you don't come and talk with me, you're not going to know anything. You're just going to walk away with your own assumptions. And assumptions have gotten us into a place like this, where we don't go and have conversations with people and learn about their lives. If you come and speak to any of us, you'll see that we're a person. We're not just a disability.
Which is what Ben says to his brother in the very first scene, doesn't he? He says, "You've only met me 3 times. How could you know anything about me?" Which is a really poignant sort of beginning of the film. So what advice would both of you give to teachers who are planning to introduce disability rights to the classroom? Kate?
Well, I think one of the great things with films and stories, it's a really easy and comfortable way to be able to share experiences. Because so much of what we learn about the rights of people with disability is through what they experience. And so having a film or a story that we can discuss the characters is a really great way to open up a conversation, how they feel, focusing on positive aspects as well. You know, what can this person do? Not focusing on all their struggles or hardships or the barriers that they face, focusing on what they can do. Focusing on their abilities as well.
Tash, do you have any hot tips for teachers that are wanting to talk about disability rights?
I think Kate's covered it really, really well. I mean, I would absolutely stress that I think it's crucial to have someone who lives with a disability come in and speak. I think it's important that we see these people as real, as living, not just as an image on a screen. And I guess that's the thing I love about this resource, is that we have got the films there that showed we can do it.
So Tash, what would you suggest that schools can do better to ensure that the rights of students with disabilities are respected and looked after?
I think there's always a concern that in addressing something like disability rights, that we're going to get it wrong, that we're going to say something insensitive, so we don't talk about it. I think that it's crucial that we have that education embedded in the curriculum, that we're discussing these things openly, having someone come and speak, using something like this resource. Everything starts from education.
To add to that, I think it's important for everyone to recognise that every experience is incredibly individual and unique. Two people are not necessarily going to have the same perspective or needs or desires to even talk about their disability. And so I think if we allow a dialogue that enables teachers to be able to understand the individual needs of, if they've got students with disability, to make sure that that child feels that their needs are heard. And you know, one child might not feel comfortable speaking in a classroom environment about their disability, another might. But there needs to be a safe space for that child to know that their individual needs are being met, and that the rest of the class is understanding that there is compassion that is being fostered within the classroom environment, that positive conversations are occurring for everyone to feel like their differences can be celebrated and understood.
I'd like to say a big thank you to Kate and Tash. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
It's been really great to hear about your experiences and your expertise. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank all of our partners, Gandel Philanthropy, Tyne Reid Foundation, Victorian Equal Opportunity and Human Rights Commission, and of course our co-presenting partner, ACME. Thanks for joining us for this professional development pilot series. We hope you found it useful in introducing human rights to your classroom. If you have any feedback or would like to get in touch, please do via the website, and don't forget to share it amongst your community. Thanks again.